And if you are talking about stuff away from the pitch, you've got to help them understand how this can help them on the pitch. The mind part is, though, for me, is the experience of the thoughts, feelings, emotion. One focus is actually a poor diet of participation.
Dan Abraham, welcome to the show.
Christy, good to see you. Good to be here.
My first question is, what influenced you to become a psychologist?
Sure, good question. Good start. I was a professional golfer after leaving school. And as I always say on podcasts like this, when I'm introducing myself and my roots into the profession, I was a pretty rubbish professional golfer. I didn't win any money. I failed miserably. I had a reasonable amount of talent, but not a lot, if we're going to use that word talent, which is obviously quite a controversial word. But a lot of my lack of success was probably down to what was going on between my two ears. So, I didn't know how to build my confidence, pinpoint my focus, practice effectively, manage emotions as effectively as I would have liked. So I really had to pack in playing professionally, otherwise I wouldn't be able to pay the bills. I started to coach golf for a bit. I always had a love of, or at least a curiosity, I would say, of the psychological side of golf, but also sport in general, and maybe of life. And so that as I was coaching the game, I decided to go and do a degree in psychology alongside my coaching, and then I did a master's degree in sports psychology. And I really came to a crossroads. Was I going to be a PGA golf coach who maybe had these qualifications on the side that kind of helped my practice, my golf practice? Or was I going to go full-on sports psychologist? And so I chose the latter. I wanted to work in other sports and maybe even other domains. And so for the past 17 years, I would say I've been a registered and qualified sports psychologist. So that's a potted history for you there.
Absolutely. In terms of your knowledge and experience, in a bit of a summary sense, how do we understand the mind? How do we get to understand those triggers and those feelings that you kind of mentioned about your experience as a golf player? How do we really get to break and dissect down mindset and the human mind?
Oh, there's a question. I don't know if we do get to, when you say understand the human mind, I mean, I think everybody's mind is different. I mean, we have a brain, and there were some fantastic neuroscientists doing wonderful work to understand our brain and the nervous system, and help us understand, brain cells and connections between neuronal pathways and interoceptive processes. That's data going from the body to the brain, and exteroceptive processes. So that's basically sensory data filling up our brain. Parts of the brain and what their functions are and how they interact. So we've got wonderful neuroscientists doing the brain side of things. I suppose as psychologists, we're interested in the mind. I suppose there'll be probably far better explanations of the mind. But I suppose for me, the mind is the experience of thoughts, feelings, emotions in many respects as we go about our everyday lives. And it's important to say here that our nervous system is tethered to our environment. And one thing lots of sports psychs in general might talk about is human behavior is as a consequence of biopsychosocial factors. So biology is that neurobiology that I spoke to a minute or so ago. The psycho is the thoughts, feelings, experience of thoughts, feelings, emotions, sensations, and then social is our social environment, our wider cultural aspects in our environment. So we really understand, I suppose, sports psychology or psychology within our wider world from a biopsychosocial perspective. And when I say understand, we're trying to understand. So that's kind of, I'm not too sure if I'm answering your question, but that's kind of how I would potentially explain human functioning and human behavior from a biopsychosocial perspective. But the mind part is, though, for me, is the experience of the thoughts, feelings, emotions. But there's far smarter people out there who will define it probably deeper and broader than I can. I'm just a humble sports psychologist, Christy.
You mentioned social and that three part
biopsychosocial.
In terms of sport, from a social point of view, people that I've spoke to, and you mentioned your experiences 18 years within this profession around culture, leadership, and environment. Have you ever seen any changes within those areas recently within your practices? And obviously, in terms of longevity, how has that changed to support the needs of professionals, as well as maybe coaches, players, everyone associated with maybe an organization? It might not necessarily have to be sport. It could be business or other domains as well. I'm intrigued on how that social element has potentially changed down to maybe more awareness of these factors.
Yeah, I think you've summed it up neatly right at the end there. I think that we are now living in a sporting society. I'll stick to sport because that's really what I do. A sporting society and a sporting culture, if you like, that is more aware of and in tune with the person, people, more rather than just the player, rather than just the performer. And that seems to have emerged over the last couple of decades. I mean, sports psychology, I mean, there's been a paper reasonably recently, I'd say 2022, that explored the history of sports psychology, and they went back to Roman times, essentially, I think, or the Greeks. And I only glanced over the paper, so I won't be able to do it justice, but it was a really fascinating sort of roller coaster historical ride. And then that the first sports psychology experiment could be deemed to be Norman Triplett's social facilitation theory, or his work on social facilitation in 1899. So we can go back that far. But really, since a sports psychologist called Coleman Griffith, I think I'm going to say back in the 60s, really started to popularize the profession. But even then, not really till the 80s, 90s, it started to grow. But then in the early millennia, I do wonder the dawn of the internet. 2 decades now of the internet going online and information being readily accessed, by people, those involved in sports, players, coaches, administrators, auxiliary staff. That capacity to reach that knowledge has made a big difference. And more latterly, maybe this generation, maybe your generation more so than mine, have, as a consequence, maybe of this broadening and deepening of knowledge, and just as a consequence of that, it's not so much about having the knowledge of the X's and the O's in sport, it's more about the human elements. And so young people now are far more demanding of the kind of environments they're experiencing in sport. They can go on YouTube and see any kind of training session, get any hints and tips from everybody these days. So it's really also comes to how are you treating me? Are you helping me experience this sport whilst also helping me experience a safe and healthy environment, so my well-being is secured and my mental health is taken care of, whilst you're helping me experience and develop my sport from a participative perspective, from a competitive perspective, from a learning perspective. So you guys these days are very demanding, and quite rightly so. I'm saying you guys, younger generation, I'm much older than you, mate. And so, yeah, the proliferation of information, and as a consequence of that, the demands now of environments and what they require is much more person-centered, people-oriented. We have to be better. We have to be able to serve our sporting communities from a participative and competitive perspective. More than just performance, more than just X's and O's, more than just learning sport, but that's still a big factor here. So I think definitely now people are more willing, as a consequence, to pay attention to people like myself who come along and say, be person centered, help, let your coaching practice be player driven, and so on and so forth. So I think that's what's happening. There's more interest there, and I think the final thing to say, I think it's good, because we have to have more sophisticated coaching environments, if you like. Those coaching environments have to be better. We have to find new and unique ways to help gold medalists and professional footballers and rugby players and baseball and basketball players emerge in safer and healthier environments, psychologically informed environments, trauma informed environments. We need coaches and people around the game who understand teaching practices, so that on the field or the court or the course, people are learning their sport with effective teaching methodologies and in those safe and healthy environments, and they're practicing and playing and working with coaches in a coordinated and cooperative and a manner, and communicating effectively, and doing so with greater autonomy and a feeling of more belonging to their social group, and so on and so forth. I feel I'm giving you a bit of a ramble, but that's kind of it's a very complex picture, and so your question isn't easy to answer simply, but hopefully that gives you an idea. To sum up, I think our environments are broader and deeper and more sophisticated now. That doesn't mean everybody is there. It doesn't mean across sport, across age groups, across levels, that everything is great and perfect and wonderful. Absolutely not. There's still a lot of work to be done, but it's getting better.
In terms of that multidisciplinary approach around psychology and mental well-being and everything that you kind of alluded to within your previous comments, I get the sense that maybe education is the catalyst, whether that's in people within leadership positions, and that might filter down and impact the culture of an organization, but even parenting as well. Have you come across any work or anything around how we can educate on these factors to improve the holistic development of a young person, or even a young coach or a young adult, just maybe life in general? Have you come across anything around that?
Well, lots of things, and hopefully I feel like I do that myself. I mean, I have an online academy that helps players, coaches, and parents work together on the mental side of the game, a football soccer academy online. I think that education is important. Education, continued professional development for coaches, resources for grassroots coaches, I think is imperative, because as you're saying, it's really so much of this has to be top down. That doesn't mean coaching has to be aggressively top down, but it does mean that the people at the top, the coaches, who we're always talking about power threat relationships, but I think that coaches are always going to hold a certain amount of power, because they are running sessions and they are developing programs. Even the most autonomy supportive coaches hold a degree of power just by being in that very position. So if they are there, whether they're grassroots or they're professional, the more knowledge that they have, that they apply, and then they continue to update their knowledge and their capacity to deliver on that knowledge, then the better, more robust, more sophisticated their coaching practice is. So leadership is, from that perspective, which is broad and multidimensional and wide-ranging, that's absolutely imperative. If we're talking about the professional game, from leadership down, I mean, leaders are able to draw on, as you said, multidisciplinary teams. In the professional side of things, that's really, really important. And that's what you're finding now, is that if we take a sport like football, with managers in English football, for instance, they have to not just have the ability now to direct on the field of play, the X's and the O's, they've also got to manage across the club. And that's, I suppose, what you're seeing. The proliferation of technical directors and sporting directors is actually so much of their role now is becoming, director of football, the ability to help the manager or the head coach to draw these community of professionals together within an organization. The sports science department working closely with the medical department, working closely with the coaches, working closely with the video analysts, working closely with sports psychs and so on and so forth, working with the backroom sort of or front office, if you like. So yeah, I think there is an increased sense of pressure on, for instance, coaches, the leaders, if you like, being able to serve their mini community in a top-down fashion. So they have to have the leadership skills to be able to do that, and not just the X's and the O's, that holistic development, as you're saying. And obviously, drawing on my work as a sports psychologist, they've also got to have more of an appreciation of the person. Their coach-athlete relationships, behavior, emotion, personality, mental skills, relationship, teamwork, social identity, teaching skills, and so on and so forth. All the stuff we've alluded to already. And then for those coaches who are perhaps not at the adult elite level, the professional level, where they're maybe grassroots, they're involved in a club, talked about parents, or they are at professional academies. Absolutely. There's this constant conversation going on around how do we healthily help parents get involved, and we saw this recently, didn't we, in the Channel 4 documentary, the Crystal Palace documentary. I don't know if you saw that, which was really interesting. And you saw a documentary as a snapshot, and it's very much about entertainment. So one looks at it with a certain amount of probably cynicism. But I think it was a fair snapshot of some parental involvement and engagement. And I think from a leadership perspective, it's for an organization, a grassroots club, a bigger academy within a professional club, to continue to learn best practice when it comes to parental involvement. How do we upskill? How do we educate parents to best support their football playing or sport playing child? There's a lot of different opinions about how that is done. It's not simple. It's not easy. There's going to be a lot of individual differences, a lot of different voices. I think probably a decade or 2 decades ago, we were saying, don't get involved, let us develop your child. Well, that's unrealistic, isn't it? Because who is the child spending most of their time with? They're spending most of the time with their parents. And so how do we help upskill parents in this way? Let's use technology. I have this online academy as an example. Cognitive bias there, looking at myself, but we can have websites, we can have WhatsApp groups now, we can have all kinds of ways to help parents feel involved and give the best possible support to their child. So yeah, I think that the pressure is enormous on coaches to be able to run a team, a club, an organization that seeks to take advantage of multidisciplinary teams in an optimal way, and that's at the professional level. And then at the grassroots or amateur level, if you like, it's what can they do from a multidisciplinary team perspective? How can they be more person oriented with the limited time that they've got? How can they healthily and safely upskill, educate parents? I agree with you. It comes back to education. There's lots of ways to do it. There's just that one biggest limiter, which is time, and money as well. So it's a constant battle and a constant challenge for coaches. It really is.
You mentioned at the beginning that your background was in golf, and you gave some examples within football just a moment ago. Is there any difference between individual sports and team sports around the area of psychology? And if so, would you like to maybe just elaborate on what those differences might be?
Sure. I think, there's the obvious one go-tos there would be, in an individual sport that can have its pressures in terms of, you are responsible for yourself. in a team sport, you're still to a degree responsible to yourself, but of course you are. But you've also got to cooperate and coordinate with others. You've also got to communicate with others as well. And that's, people forget that. I get a lot of, I don't know, people in football go, oh, I get golf. I get how golf can be psychological, but because you're out there on your own. But how is football? Well, I honestly find football more psychological than golf in many respects, because in football, you've got to, as I've said, you've got to cooperate, coordinate, communicate with others. You've got to lead others, team with others, and you're not always going to be in the team. And that's, as a golfer, I could go and pay my entrance fees, if you like, and I could go and play. You have to qualify for certain tours, but boy, over the last 17 years, I've worked with players in football who the whole scale of our work has been based on they're not in the team, managing the emotions around that. So much of their career, if we're talking about the professional level, is out of their control. So there's that element of being picked or not picked for a team. Of course, you've got different types of sports. You've got self-paced sports. You've got you've got sports like golf, for instance, where there's a lot of time to think, hence why it's deemed to be quite psychological. But again, there's an interesting juxtaposition there, whereby in football, as an example, which is deemed to be a fast-paced team invasion sport, well, yes, the game works in seconds, but the brain and the nervous system work in milliseconds. So the brain trumps football for speed every single time, right? And the way the brain and nervous system work is it throwing up thoughts and feelings and emotions, judgments about what's going on around you, how the game's going, how I'm playing, how my teammates are going, who the opposition are, how good they are, to name a few of many, many judgments that are going on. So, pace of sport within a team or an individual environment, it can influence as well. But I do come back to, for me, the main mediator is I don't necessarily in a team sport get to choose that I'm going to play. And that is a fairly emphatic factor that influences emotion and feeling and thinking within those environments. So as an individual, yes, I'm out there on my own. I can't rely on anybody. And you could argue that in football and rugby and basketball, there's an element of being able to hide if it's not going so well out there. But I think every single sport, no matter whether they're team or individual, whether they're self-paced or they're invasion, fast-paced sports, the reality is they all have a strong psychological component to them.
You said that players form some form of anxiety or some form of psychological discomfort and stress through not being in the team. And I think that process of not being in control of the situation seems to be, would you say that's a kind of a key catalyst in terms of triggers around mental well-being, or is there other factors that you've worked across in terms of your practices where you see other elements become a factor? I'm intrigued on that being a fear factor and that becoming the kind of the moment of, I need to see a psychologist, I need to maybe speak about this.
Yeah, it's interesting you're saying that, and you picked up on that. You're 100% correct. And because I'm saying it's interesting because as a sports psychologist, sometimes I'm slightly worried about the narrative out there around well-being and around mental health. Because a lot of it is based on, 1 in 5 people experiences mental health problems during their lives, so we have to help sports people with their mental health. Absolutely fine, no problem with that. I think that's the empathetic and safest and healthiest viewpoint. Okay, fine. But I'm coming at your question this way because I do think we have to remember that it's the sport itself, the nature of the sport, that tends to trigger a lot of well-being and mental health challenges within its participants, within its competitors. And again, I'm saying that because I think so many strategies to help manage the well-being of players and the mental health of players has to start with coaching practice. How coaches coach and the processes within their practice. What kind of goals are they helping set players? What kind of language is enveloped within the coaching environment? Are we using very extreme language? Must wins, must performs. It will be a disaster if. Are we helping players? Are we working with them individually if we can? Are we helping create individual development programs for those who are for everybody, but especially for those who aren't in the team? Are we giving clear, concise? Are we providing clear, concise communication? Are we being open and honest? All of that and many more coaching practice environment factors work in servitude to well-being and mental health. So you said this word control. There are status, control, autonomy, relatedness, feedback. These factors here make a big difference to how our brain experiences the volume of anxiety, stress it might experience. And so that is something I'm always working on when I work with coaches, is talking about, are you helping your players feel as great a sense of control over themselves and their career as is humanly possible within the coaching practice and coaching environment that you're creating? You can't give 100% because ultimately there's only 11 players on the pitch. Mm-hmm. There's only, how many is there now? 6 or 7 or whatever on the bench, right? So you can't give 100%. You have to communicate that clearly. But what are you introducing? It's not just well-being and mental health isn't just about well-being and mental health practices in terms of, let's look at, positive psychology stuff like gratitude, emotional regulation, and the obvious stuff. It's also about great coaching practices, great coaching processes within your practices, individual development programs, great teaching ability, so that all of your players feel like they're getting something out of your activities. Well-being's influenced there. Doing the best to pay attention to as many players as possible, stretched activities that create sweat and smiles, helping players set appropriate goal orientation, appropriate goals that help them feel like they're not overly pressured by outcomes and overly pressured by high performance. Failed to say this so far, introducing mental skills with mental techniques so that players feel a greater sense of being able to take control of themselves under pressure. The use of self-talk and embodied techniques and appropriate goal setting and things like that. So these things are so important to help players feel like they have more of a sense of control. Those for me have to be healthy options. And Dr. Kate Hayes recently said this in an interview, possibly saw it on the BBC, about the Lionesses. And really this again, we're talking about that level, the professional, the adult elite level. This historically, we are socially ingrained at that level into win, 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 win. But it's not so much about having a winning mentality. It's having a mentality that's focused on the things that are going to give us our best chance to win. And that's very, very different. That's more sophisticated. It's broader. It's deeper. There's individual differences and so on and so forth. So yes, a sense of control is important.
I'm intrigued around transitions out of sport. So especially at that elite level, and then all of a sudden transitions happen and factors around injury might happen, or coming into kind of an exit process within elite performance, and that might have some form of jeopardy on the brain in terms of psychology. Can you tell me a little bit of an insight on that, and how we as practitioners might be able to support players within that process?
I think if you're talking about the adult elite level, and we're thinking about some of the organisations that I'm sure people listening in will think about, really there have to be exit strategies as early as possible. I think it's certainly, again, I mean, we're talking about the adult elite level here, but there has to be support for leaving the sport in as healthy and as safe a way as possible, and really the constant promotion of having things outside of your sport, whether it's coaching badges, whether it's businesses. I think one of the most disastrous narratives that tends to flow through, especially social media, is, oh, this player is overly focused over it. Marcus Rashford is too focused on that. He should be focused here. And I think now he's demonstrating that you can have a business, a life, interests away from your sport and perform very, very well. And I think that has to start earlier. Of course, there has to be focus on your sport. Of course, there has to be. But I think a part of this more sophisticated relationship we have with your sport, high performance, excellence, if you like, is understanding that one focus is actually a poor diet of participation, and having multiple identities and multiple interests is a healthier diet, if you like. Eating all of your greens, if you like, and all of your vegetable and your food groups, to use an analogy there. So having things away, I think, is so important, and that really has to start with the messages from the organisation. It's again, if we talk about the clubs we're talking about, it's having your under 21s perhaps start coaching badges, perhaps promoting the idea of doing qualifications. I don't think you can force anybody, but you do have to educate them around the importance of that, and how that's going to influence their transition out of the game. And I think these clubs tend to have them these days, welfare officers, people like myself, who these players can speak to. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean, just because they have other things, it doesn't mean that they're going to leave the profession in a simple and easy manner, because we're all human beings. And, doing what I've done for the last 17 years, 18 years, I know that these players, what do they love? They love the sport, obviously. Perhaps even more, they love the day-to-day interactions, being with teammates, that sense of belonging to the game, the sense of belonging within their team. That's something that they love and get used to. And so, subsequently, I don't think there's any magic bullet here. It can be just, giving these players an opportunity to speak to somebody like myself, who they can share what they're thinking, what they're feeling, the inner experiences they're having as a consequence of the change in their outer world. Really just offering that up to them. But that's, I think, all one can do. And I think more and more players now, we almost go back to your first question, players are very open to having these conversations and being able to transition out of the sport in a simpler and easier fashion, as a consequence of being able to rationalize where they are and what their life looks like, and understanding that they are going to have some unhelpful negative thoughts, feelings and emotions, because a big part of their life, a chapter, multiple chapters are closing. It's okay to feel down about that. It's okay to experience negative emotion about that. Of course, that's going to exist. We just need to be careful that we just need to help them make sure that the volume of that emotion isn't turned too high, that it's going to cause might cause a bit of low mood, but it's when it causes serious low mood and then going into depressive states, that's where they need to be helped. So it kind of starts, for me, incumbent on the organization, which I think they by and large is done very well these days. Obviously that's resource influenced. As you go down the leagues, if we're talking about football, there's going to be less support for those kind of things because the resources just aren't there. But then it's also incumbent on people like myself who are involved in these organizations to make it our business to have conversations with footballers, athletes, about this kind of stuff, and just giving them the option to have conversations and understand that they can flex and adapt their mindset to deal with some of the emotions that they're experiencing.
I mean, I'm intrigued on how you set that environment for a young person, a young adult, to maybe speak about their feelings and thoughts, because I think from what you've said, it might be a challenge for a player to have this acceptance of this transition. And people might see you as the psychologist, and I don't want to speak to a psychologist because it shows some form of potential weakness, and I'm talking about my feelings and I'm potentially letting my guard down in a hyper masculine environment, hypothetically. I'm intrigued on how you create that environment, because I can imagine those thoughts do occur within football and potentially other sports as well.
Well, I think, if we come away from the reference, although we can come back to it, we come away from the reference around career transitions and just in general talk about, sports psychology and its acceptance within these environments. Again, I'm always going to come back to your first question and my response, which is really, I would say it would be very rare to walk into, let's say, a footballing environment at the adult elite level and even the developing elite level now and experience a great deal of skepticism. There's just enough out there now and enough knowledge and education for young people to understand that this is important. Now, you've got to be good at what you do. I would say you've got to know your stuff. If you stand in front of even the youngest players and there's a whiff of BS about you, and you're saying things that are either unrealistic, or perhaps too complicated or too complex, then you will lose them and you will lose their respect. So I think that you have to speak in a manner that reflects back some football knowledge. If we're going to talk about football, although it is possible to stand in front of them and say, I know nothing about football, but you've got lots of people around you who know a lot about football. I'm here for, human functioning and human development. And, I'm passionate about helping you be the best that you can be and maintaining your well-being. But I know nothing about football. I think you can have that, but then you've still got to keep it as simple as possible, but no simpler. As simple as possible, but no simpler. I think that you've got to make it as practical and pragmatic as possible. I think that you want to engage players in a manner that helps them understand they can take this out onto the pitch with them. And if you are talking about stuff away from the pitch, you've got to help them understand how this can help them on the pitch. I still think players, footballers are there in terms of, is this going to help the boat go quicker? You know what I mean? Is this going to help me play better football? Unless they are coming to you specifically for something well-being and mental health oriented. And in that case, you've got them in the room anyway. So I think you have to be football oriented as best you can be. Speak a reasonable amount of their language. Possibly. As simple as you could possibly be without being ridiculously simple. I think you have to be down to earth. I think if you stand in front of people and say you can think your way to greatness, they know that they can't. Although there are still unrealistic expectations around psychology and sports psychology out there. I think you have to make it practical, oriented towards the game. I think that's vital. I think you've got to be friendly. That stands to reason. I think you've got to be confidential. Again, that stands to reason. I think if you've got those, then you've got a good fight. Then I think you're fine. It's not even a good fighting trust. Then I think you're fine. Then I think you've got a great client base on your doorstep if you're in there at a club. I think you're going to have players who say, I'm all right, Jack. I don't need this, which is fine. No problem at all. No worries. And I think you have to feel that you don't always have to help. That just being there is enough, and just having casual, informal conversations is enough. However, I'm going to slightly contradict what I've just said there, because we live in a world of contradictions. That I write a lot, and when I sit with coaches, I feel that these environments need shared mental models around the mental side of the game. So whilst I understand one player might, or a few players might go, hey, I appreciate and I respect you, but I don't need this. That's very nice, but you're playing in a team. You're a teammate. You're not on your own. You're not part of an individual sport. So you can say that to your blue in the face, but you've got to be a great teammate. You've got to have good relationships. You've got to communicate. Maybe you've got to lead. Maybe you don't, but maybe you do. You've got to be a great teammate. You've got to be there for others. And if we're going to have a shared mental model, for instance, if we bring in, by shared mental model, I mean a shared language. If we bring in HPM, LPM, high performance mindset and low performance mindset, I'm very sorry, my friend, but you've got to be a part of this. And we don't have to work extensively together from an individual perspective, from an individual standpoint, but you're damn well going to be using the terms HPM and LPM. Otherwise, we're not going to be the best we can be. And I'm talking about the adult elite level here. I'm not talking about under 12s.
Yeah.
So I know I've come away slightly from your original question, but I think you have a ready-made population. I'm answering it like this because you are always going to have some people within that population who are far more open-minded than they've ever been. They've got far more knowledge. They've only got to click on YouTube and watch some stuff, and they get it now. They watch some stuff on site. They get it. They're on Twitter. They're on Insta. They get it. Coaches are much more educated now. They're getting it from their coaches. So they get it. But you're always going to have, depending on how you're going to go about this, which I would always be, hey, come on, coaches, we need to create shared language here. We need to really get this right to make sure we've got a team here. I personally believe, and there's lots of sports sites who disagree with me, but I personally believe then we need more of an all-in feel. I can function in a different way as a sports site, but then we need an all-in. And that becomes a little bit more challenging because you're always going to have a few players who go, no, this isn't for me. But that to me isn't good enough. That to me is not being a great teammate. Did I kind of answer your question there?
Yeah, I think it does. Yeah, I think it does. I think it's an holistic viewpoint towards players, individuals, and the collective of a team and an organization.
Yep.
Final thoughts then, Dan. I want you to think about maybe where psychology is going in the future. You mentioned YouTube and technology and other devices that might be helpful in terms of educating us, but where do you see psychology going in terms of its advancement in the future? Where would you, is there any trends or anything that's kind of apparent within your practices that you've come across recently that you might go, okay, this is where the trajectory might lead within this area of mental well-being, psychology and mental health, etc.?
Yeah, I think, look, I think the first obvious thing to say is I think it will continue to become more popular. And I think there will continue to be more resources placed on it. I'm hoping, my first answer is a pretty dry answer, but I'm hoping that the resources that are available, and I'm talking about the very highest level, I'm hoping to not see that kind of Crystal Palace documentary again. I think Crystal Palace are great and fair play to them for opening up, and there's brilliant coaches there. This isn't a criticism of coaches by any stretch of the imagination, but when you've got a documentary with a coach saying, well, every decision we make could cost the club millions, as in we're making decisions that's influencing the development of our players. And at the same time, in that documentary, you've got maladaptive parental behaviour, and you've got players really struggling from a mental perspective, and some very all or nothing language. The language there, again, it's a snapshot of a snapshot of a snapshot. But it's an organisation that brings in multi-millions of pounds. Quite why you haven't got more of a prolific, there are good sports psychs there, I'm not saying there isn't, but more support, more comprehensive support. I'm hoping that certainly at the adult elite level, there's more comprehensive support across academies for this kind of stuff. I think at first team level, that every club has somebody in place, because not everybody does, and there's more of an attitude of where this is going to be organization driven, rather than just, oh yeah, so and so manager doesn't really fancy having a sports psych. I just think that's got to die. I'm not saying that exists now. My understanding is it still does exist, but so I hope that's the future. I think from grassroots and all the rest of us, the 99% of us, we've got to continue to find ways to utilize technology to distribute this information. We've got to continue to scaffold the learning that people have of sports psychology by making our work as accessible as possible. My podcast, The Sports Psych Show, revolves around helping fairly complex stuff from academics become much more accessible. Sometimes it's difficult to do that. But I think we've got to, the papers they're writing, the research they're doing is imperative, it's brilliant. And we also have to respect that not everybody wants to sit down and read a research paper. In fact, 99.9% of people don't. So we need to find ways to advance the ease with which those messages are distributed and understood. And then you can get on to the fun stuff, like depending on how you define psychology. And I have a very broad definition of psychology. So I think of cognition, I think of learning as much as I do mental health and well-being. You might think of virtual reality and the use of virtual reality. I mean, Dr. Gaia Jordet, Norwegian Institute of Sport, is doing some great work there, and there's some virtual reality stuff coming out and around scanning behavior, which has a heavy, this is cognitive stuff, this is psychology. I think hopefully we're going to continue to help coaches become better teachers in what they do by helping them understand learning and how learning might happen. There's different theories of how learning might happen. So the use of virtual reality would be one thing. Virtual environments, would be great for professional organizations. So I think there's a lot of at a lot of levels, a lot of stuff that might be interesting in the future. Other than that, I haven't got a clue, mate. I haven't got a crystal ball.
You could say maybe artificial intelligence, maybe as well. I don't know. That's the thing.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of that goes over my head, so I wouldn't be able to comment on it. But yeah, absolutely. Hopefully, it doesn't do me out of a living. As people, was it chat bot or something that you can ask a question and they give you an answer from summing up all the best answers on the internet? That sounds quite scary to people like myself, but hopefully humans remain so complex that you're never going to fully get a good individual answer out of those things for yourself. So
you mentioned your podcast. What we'll do is we'll put your link in the description for anyone listening or watching this. And finally, Dan, where can we find you on social media? I presume.
Where can't you find me on social media? I'm a sad man. So my main Twitter handle would be @DanAbraham77, and that's a very coach-oriented one. @DanAbraham77. I've also got @AbrahamsGolf, at Sports Psych Show. And at I think it's Abraham Soccer Academy. It's one I've got as well. At Dan Abraham Soccer Academy, something like that. But the main one is @Dan Abraham 77. I've got Insta at Dan Abrahams Sport, Facebook at Dan Abrahams Soccer, and I post on LinkedIn. Obviously, find Dan Abrahams. Post on LinkedIn and Facebook every day, a mini post, mini article that people can read. The podcast is the Sports Psych Show. My website is danabrahams.com, where you can find my books, Soccer Tough, Soccer Tough 2, Soccer Brain, Golf Tough, and my online academy.
So Google Dan Abrahams.
You can. The short answer is that one. Yeah.
Dan, I just want to thank you for your time and good luck in the future, and hopefully cross paths soon. Thank you.
Indeed. Thank you, mate.